later in the night, actually 1:30 Moscow time, of course, we heard that Putin was not up for a ceasefire, but does want to have negotiations one-to-one, in-person negotiations with the Ukrainians in Istanbul on the 15th of May. But of course, that won't entail a ceasefire. And the Ukrainians and the Europeans have said, right, ceasefire is your non-negotiable, unconditional ceasefire starting point. And then from there, we can go to the negotiations. And the Russians have said, no, we're going to start with negotiations. And that might at some point entail ceasefires. And that is a refusal to do a ceasefire. And the Europeans are saying, no, ceasefire first. And when I say Europeans, I mean Ukraine included, with the backing of the US. And of course, we're at this situation where we're kind of still waiting for the Americans, for Trump to give us some clarity, because Putin came out with his decision and then Trump seemed to laud that as being great, fantastic, it's a move forward. But it's not an agreement to a ceasefire. And actually, if we're going to take Trump and the Europeans seriously, then that means a massive ramp up of sanctions, because the Russians have not agreed to a ceasefire. So that's still kind of where we're at. There's not a great deal to add to it, other than, I mean, there's some interesting stuff about Pope Leo, the new Pope, who has, in his, I think, opening remarks, talked about Ukraine. So that's a good thing. And we also have some interesting statements from like Maria Zakharova. So I'm going to go to those first before going to military aid, just to keep us up to date. As Hedrian says, I never can understand why Trump always goes along with what Putin wants, because unfortunately he sees Putin as someone he aspires to be. He wants that kind of power. He loves the strongman leaders of the world, and he believes that, I mean, goodness me, if you look at what Stephen Miller is doing with habeas corpus, like, wanting to get rid of habeas corpus is the first thing you do if you want a dictatorship. I mean, it's unbelievable. It means you are giving your country permission to arrest people on the street, and they can't do anything about it. There's no appeal they can have. And you do that when you're at war, and for the safety of, you kind of streamline your legal processes, because you're in an emergency, you've been invaded, and for the safety of everyone, you need to be able to do things quickly. But you don't do that in times of peace, like where the US is just existing as it has done for the last 20 years, 30 years, 40. It is not in a position of being at war on the territory of the US. And yet, if they want to get rid of habeas corpus, that is your first, that is a huge step towards dictatorship. So when you look at the sorts of things that the Trump administration is trying to do, then you can see that, well, they kind of aspire to be a Putin-esque administration. And so when Putin says something, he sits up and listens. And when Macron or Merz or Starmer says something, he's not really bothered, Trump. So that's why. I mean, it is bizarre, but that's the way. It's not bizarre if you understand who Trump is and what floats his boat. And democracy doesn't float Trump's boat. He is not interested in floating in. He's not interested in democracy in one iota. But there you go. Viggo Holmsen. Oh no, missed that one. Already flying up the list there. Completely negating police procedure. Talk to every cadet. I mean, honestly, stuff going on in the US that many of us will not be aware of if you're not paying close attention. But the sorts of things that Stephen Miller is saying and trying to do should scare the living crap out of anyone interested in democracy. Anyway, that aside, let's have a look. Let's get back to Ukraine. So we've had on Telegram, Maria Zakharova. So she is a spokesperson for the MFA, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia. She's accused France, UK, and Germany's leaders of drug use. A Frenchman, an Englishman, and a German got on a train and got high. In her view, a video showing Macron and Merz allegedly shows those two allegedly hiding cocaine in a pipe while clearing the table. I mean, honestly, really, is this where we're at? And if you give the Russian administration the time of day, it just blows my mind. So, as I mentioned, Pope Leo the 14th called for a just peace in Ukraine during his address to the faithful in St. Peter's Square. He said he carries in his heart sufferings of beloved Ukrainian people, and added that the world is currently experiencing a third world war in pieces. And actually, I agree with that. In fact, there's a little bit more to be said about what he said somewhere else. So here, Anton Gerashenko, I carry in my heart the sufferings of the beloved Ukrainian people. Let everything possible be done to achieve genuine, just and lasting peace as soon as possible. This is really important because you've got the Pope, who is obviously speaking on behalf of sort of 1.3 billion Catholics around the world. He's got a huge amount of gravitas and not power, not hard power, but certainly soft power and influence. And he is the phrasing there is so important, right? When you include the word just, a genuine, just and lasting peace, those words we don't always hear from other Americans. So sometimes, not sometimes, all the time at the moment from the American administration since January the 20th, we have the omission of the word just. They're not interested in there being justice in bringing about peace. They're interested in a quick peace that allows them to start trading with Russia again. And they're interested in a minerals deal with Ukraine. And so for the Pope to say those words, I think is in a very important contrast to what we have otherwise heard. May all prisoners be freed, and may children return to their families. I too address the world's great powers by repeating the ever-present call, never again war, Pope Leo XIV said from the loggia of St. Peter's Basilica. Yes, and this is the last bit that I wanted to talk about as well. I'm not surprised about this. So Sky News is reporting that Putin's proposal for talks in Istanbul was, quote, hastily put together in order to avoid meeting Europe and US ultimatum for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Journalists noted that the address looked chaotic and improvised. Now, in all honesty, it's going to be that. So I'm not defending Russia here, but if you suddenly hear European leaders with the backing of the US and Zelensky saying, we demand there a 30-day ceasefire on Monday, which is kind of 36 hours away. We're demanding a 30-day ceasefire. If we don't get that, there will be huge sanctions and possibly extra military aid to Ukraine. Then you are going to panic. You're going to be like, right, we need to answer to this, because otherwise they are going to hit us with sanctions. So we need to try and regain, like I said this morning, we need to regain the control of this situation, the control of the narrative. And Putin's statement was all about regaining control, which is, we're not going to have a ceasefire, but instead we're going to give you something else, which is direct negotiations in Istanbul on May the 15th with Ukraine. Actually, that succeeded in appealing to Trump, and Trump, at least initially, has been in favor of that. That then puts Europe and Zelensky in a difficult situation, because does that mean that we are not going to put huge sanctions on Russia, or is still in the kind of 30-day ceasefire needs to happen first situation? So there's a bit of confusion. So I think Putin did a very good job, and by very good I mean from his point of view. Of course, anything Putin does is horrific in my eyes, but from Putin's from Russia's point of view, he did a good job of trying to wrest back control there. And naturally, they would have been trying to work out exactly what to say and how to say it. And there would have been panic and all sorts of meetings taking place and trying to kind of gain the situation. And that would have led to, well, it probably led to Putin being 1.5 hours late to that statement. They might have been chopping and changing things. Probably he was on the phone to Erdogan in Turkey to make sure that things were all okay for that. There would have been phone calls going around all over the shop. And for that, yes, it would have been it had to have been hastily put together. They literally had a few hours to react to that and put together a statement that wasn't really a press conference. So, yeah, I think that's fairly obvious. But, it is also, I guess, somewhat revealing. Okay. Now, before we go on to the military aid section of this video that I was going to share with you yesterday, now there's even more to add to it because there's 24 hours has elapsed. I have to do a bit of, it's been a beautiful day outside. I've put up our 12 foot good old imperial measurement best way pool, kind of like these anyway, you know what they are, filling it up with water now. Had Helen's family round to, had her older kids who've got these little toddlers, and they're going to be excited to use that. They come around every weekend, every summer to like swim in there, if you like. But I'm not very mobile, so I started the proceeding off with drinking a beer and delegating, and then I was on my knees because I can't stand for very long these days. So I was on my knees putting it together, and it's now filling up, and it's looking chef's kiss. We've had an amazing summer that's not that's in the spring. We've had like 6 weeks of no rain. There's like a drought in the UK at the moment. It's been stonkingly warm. Loving it. So I did have a beer earlier, and do you know what? I'm going to have a neck oil, which is an IPA, and there's nothing you can do about it. So cheers, everybody. I don't advocate drinking, of course. Alcohol is bad for you, but I am going to have a beer right now. So just to lubricate the vocal cords in order to deliver you the most wholesome of military aid news. And absolutely correct here from Cheryl, who says Stephen Miller is a shadow president. I couldn't agree any more with that, which is exactly why I did a whole video on Stephen Miller the other day, because I think he's the single most important person in the American government at the moment, the single most influential person. And I think Trump has actually pretty much admitted that by when it was suggested that Stephen Miller was made national security advisor as Tim Walz was kind of demoted and pushed aside. He said, no, that would be a kind of demotion for Stephen Miller. In other words, Stephen Miller is presently, I mean, the inference would be much higher than national security advisor. And other people are saying very clearly that Stephen Miller is the right-hand man of Donald Trump. So I personally don't think there's anyone more important in the American government at the moment. But anyway, let us move on. I do get a bit obsessed with what's going on in the American political sphere. Right, we're going to start with tomorrow, and this was actually 2 days ago. The EU will provide Ukraine with 1 billion euros to produce its own weapons, according to Kaja Kallas. And indeed, here, No Reports kind of confirms that Ukraine just received 1 billion euros from the EU under the ERA program. Ukrainian Prime Minister Shmyhal announced the funds come from profits from immobilized Russian central bank assets and will go toward, so No Reports that it will go towards critical budget needs and strengthening the state, which is actually very different from going straight into the Ukrainian defense, in the military industrial complex. However, here No Report says in Lviv, Ukraine signed a deal with Denmark, France, and Italy to receive the first $1 billion euro tranche from frozen Russian asset profits. The funds will be used to purchase Ukrainian-made weapons, boosting both defense and domestic industry. So, two claims as to how that money will be spent. But yeah, so I presume that is going to go to fund weapons at the moment. That seems to be, there's a lot of kind of talk and understanding that you are better spending your money investing in Ukrainian defense because you're just going to build things much more cheaply and you'll get twice as much bang for your buck. And this was said by Koulibius, the defense guy from the EU, saying actually we're going to move towards investing in the Ukrainian defense sector because you're getting 40 billion euros becomes 80 billion euros. And when you see it in those terms, it's even more stark, right? As to, wow, why we really should be. I mean, the problem is for European or any leader is you're going to want to be spending your taxpayers' money as effectively as possible. But what does effective mean? Does it mean in the best way possible for Ukraine, or are you going to take into account stimulating your own economy? And there's that tension there, which is, from a UK point of view, we have BAE Systems and another bunch of military industrial concerns that are able to provide a wide range of stuff for Ukraine. Whereas someone like Denmark, because they pretty much exhausted what their own companies can make, because they don't have the range of companies that, say, the UK, particularly the US, would have. So if you got, I don't know, £3 billion from the US budget, like we could just give Ukraine £3 billion, and they would actually be able to produce £6 billion worth of goods on UK like terms, or we can invest £3 billion in the UK, and that stimulates our economy, and Ukraine get £3 billion worth of stuff. And so there's a tension there, because actually, if we want to let Ukraine have the most stuff, then we give them that money. But then that is UK tax money going to Ukraine and not being used in the UK to stimulate growth. So I understand that tension, and it's interesting that the EU defense guys said, we're better off putting it straight into Ukraine, because there's going to be a lot of pushback to that, because particularly the French have been bigger on keeping the money inside the EU. And so, do you give Ukraine 2 howitzers or 1 howitzer and stimulate your own economy? And that's kind of it. So this happens with the Caesar, like I've said to you before. Caesars are twice as expensive as the Bogdana 2S-22 self-propelled howitzer that the Ukrainians make. Okay. Is it twice as good? Probably not. I mean, it will be better than the Bogdana, but it's not twice as good. So the Ukrainians would prefer to have 2 Bogdanas, but the French would prefer to invest in their own economy and give 1 Caesar, I would have thought. And so anyway, there's a tension. I know I've said this a million times, but, said again. Okie dokie. Right. Just keeping an eye on the live chat as well. Let's go over to this next one. So France, exactly as I just said, France will use profits and frozen Russian assets to maintain the Caesar self-propelled howitzers it provided to Ukraine's military, said Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot. And actually, to be fair, that's perfectly fine. Those howitzers will need to be maintained. That money will need to come from somewhere. That servicing will need to happen somehow. And for France to use some of those frozen Russian assets to do that, I think is absolutely spot on. In 2025, Denmark will allocate 830 million euros to Ukraine for the purchase of weapons from the Ukrainian military-industrial complex, according to the Danish Ministry of Defense. So exactly what I was just talking about, that Denmark are prepared to give all of that money to Ukraine to spend as they see fit. UK, I would imagine, and France, I would imagine, would be like the French are the second biggest military exporters in the world. So they have a very, very successful military-industrial complex, and they have the range of equipment that can be built in France to give to Ukraine. But you'll only get half as much stuff, but the French will probably still prefer that. Czech ammunition initiative for Ukraine faces criticism over delivery delays and high commissions. The Czech companies procuring artillery shells for Ukraine reportedly charge commissions up to 4 times higher than the Ukrainian state agencies would. And here's the problem with operating both outside, like Ukraine are going to be, this is exactly kind of what we're just talking about. So Ukraine are going to be doing things and generally not profiteering off it. You might get individuals trying to profiteer. There will be corruption going on. Of course there will. But from a kind of state level, like, or from their, you have so many drone manufacturers that are not-for-profit drone manufacturing organizations that are doing this because they are Ukraine's lifeline. So you look at Wild Hornets, they're not going to be profiteering off making their drones for the Ukraine front line, right? They are going to be trying to be as efficient as possible and as low cost as possible in terms of not adding on unnecessary profits. But a Czech concern outside of Ukraine, just like any other country, will have people who are going to seek as much profits as possible out of this war. I mean, the great Ocean Colour Scene song, Profit in Peace, is a great song that talks to this. So anyway, I was just going to just remind myself of the lyrics and start singing it to you. There ain't no profit in peace. So anyway, but in my more cynical years prior to this war, I would be very, very skeptical of the defense military industrial complex, right? So trying to profit off war. But I've come to a much more nuanced understanding that they're an absolute necessity if you are at war. And when you're being invaded, my goodness me, you need the military industrial complexes, not only your own country, but many other allied nations, to be working 24/7 to help you. But there will be people who will profiteer off that. And unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast. It will be the same if we were talking about the healthcare, the pandemic, right? Pandemic is a great example. No matter what the industry is, humans will try and profit off, misery or disaster or this or that or whatever. Pandemic came along and so many people lined their own pockets. Don't get me started on the contracts that were given away by the Conservative government in the UK during the pandemic. It was disgusting. Lady Moan, who and her husband, they what was it, 69 million in an offshore account. Then you had all these PPE contracts going to people that never had any experience in providing this stuff. I'll do that. Yep, okay. We've just streamlined the contract procedure so you don't have to go through the normal hoops. Jump through the normal hoops and checks and balances for contracts. Yep, brilliant. Okay. And you're my mate. I've just met down the pub. You're my neighbour. Hancock, who was the health secretary at the time, just handed out a contract to his mate to make, was it vials for drugs or whatever, and had absolutely no prior experience in this. Hand out this massive contract, no checks and balances. And you're like, this is corruption. Okay. So it happens in every nation. In the UK during a pandemic. And it will happen during the war with Ukraine, where people are going to be annoyingly profiteering off this. So here, the Czech initiative, which is amazing, has done an amazing job. There are people making a pretty penny off this, sadly. And, let's do everything we can to minimize that as much as possible. Okay. But the interesting point there was that makes it more expensive than if Ukrainians were doing it themselves. And again, it's that same problem. Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha thanked the EU High Representative Kaja Kallas for her key initiative to supply. So the EU, and I presume this is completely different then from the Czech initiative, but I'm not 100% sure, to supply 2 million artillery shells to Ukraine. EU states have already pledged over 1.35 million rounds for 2025. And a push to increase that number continues. But that could well be the Czech initiative. I'm never quite sure. But there, EU to provide Ukraine with over 1 million shells over 2025, allocate over 2 billion for military aid from frozen Russian assets. And the news comes as delegations from 35 countries and the Council of Europe gathered in Lviv, and that was a few days ago on the 9th. Now, sorry, I haven't changed the tab. A full-scale war between India and Pakistan may disrupt Ukraine's access to military supplies, said Bogdan Miroshnichenko. I'm sure I butchered his name, but there you go. An escalation would likely halt supplies as both countries would seek more weapons to support their own war efforts. Absolutely. Right. I'm just going to, please indulge me. It's a marvelous day when you can, when the weather is hot and you can have a nice cool IPA. Okay, let's move on. Now we're going to go to a British defense concern here, providing bespoke stuff to Ukraine, which is absolutely fantastic. Now here, this is something I reported on previously because I presume this is the Super Cat, and the Super Cat is the chassis that then had these bespoke missile pods or systems put on top, and they made this for Ukraine. So the UK has provided Ukraine with 8 of these. That's 1 minute 30 video. What we've got, how long is that video? It's a YouTube video. So this is probably a pared down British forces video here to talk about this, but they provided 8 Raven, as they call them, short-range air defense systems, and they plan to deliver 5 more per the UK Ministry of Defence. Over 400 ASRAAM missiles were also supplied, and they have downed over 70% of their.
Good afternoon. My name's Ollie.
So I'm going to. Can you first of all, can you let me know in the live chat if you can hear the audio here?
Good afternoon. My name's Ollie Todd from Task Force Kindred, and I'd like to introduce you to the Raven air defense system. This is an air defense system which was generated in 2022. We went from concept to delivery of a capability within 3 months. It's an amazing system which combines the HMT 600 Supercat vehicle with an advanced short-range air-to-air missile, the ASRAAM missile, which has turned it into one of the most effective short-range air defense systems in use in Ukraine at the moment. The system is built upon a HMT 600, which is a high-mobility 6x6 all-terrain vehicle with a bespoke mount built on it to fit 2 ASRAAM missiles, which sit on rails that we have taken from older and out-of-service Hawk, Jaguar, and Tornado aircraft. The system can be deployed very quickly. The missiles can be moved into position and can engage targets as required as quickly as possible. The system can be operated from both inside the cab as well as remoted to up to 50 meters away from the vehicle, giving great flexibility for the operator whether they want to be in the vehicle or away from it. The system uses a gamepad type controller so that they can identify, track, and then switch from the seeker on the roof of the vehicle to the seeker onto the missile, allowing it to engage quickly. The operator can then switch to a secondary target and engage that as required.
How cool is that? You know, using a gaming control. And I mean, this is, I remember at the beginning of the war sharing an article on you about, it was actually Israeli concern that had developed a tank and it used gaming controls inside. It said not only is this ergonomically beneficial, but actually the learning time for people coming in to learn this, these are young people now coming into the armed, well, they're always young people coming to the armed forces, but you know, everyone's got gaming experience basically. So if you're coming in and you've already played on Xboxes and PlayStation 5s, and you then sat down in front of this machine and said, right, get to know how to use this, and you've got a controller, then you are going to be, yeah, this is going to be easy. And so it's both ergonomically, practically beneficial, but also, you know, in terms of training, it's excellent. So yeah, that is what's happening with the UK provision of these awesome pieces of kit by the looks of them, right? As Jeff 2146, who compiles his lists of military aid that's given to Ukraine, BFBS, that's British Forces Broadcasting Services, Forces News published a video of the Raven short-range air defense system donated by UK to Ukraine. Previously nameless, the Raven consists of an electro-optical targeting system that allows for the launch of 2 AIM-123 ASRAAM short-range air-to-air missiles from the ground using launch rails recycled from retired RAF aircraft. And I love that. I love me a bit of recycling there. They also claim that the Ukrainians have already used the system to engage 400 targets with a success rate of 70% or so. So that's really good news. Ukraine's armed forces will receive over 100 new Oncilla armored vehicles from the Polish manufacturer Mister. The updated Oncilla Sturm features enhanced protection and remote weapon station. They are getting stuff from all over the shop, aren't they? And this is, I guess, the asymmetrical situation whereby Ukraine are able to pull on all of these allies, like 50 allied nations, that are going to be wanting to provide their own vehicles to Ukraine to stimulate their own economy, as I said earlier. And Russia, yeah, they are getting help from North Korea and Iran, and that is deeply, deeply worrying. But technically, the scope should be far greater for other nations to help Ukraine than for those nations to help Russia. The big issue is China, and how much of a part is China playing. Now, I think there have already been 200 Oncillas provided to Ukraine already. In fact, I think, yeah, this Max 24 here saying the company has already delivered over 200 of these vehicles to the Ukrainians, but they'll manufacture another 100 this year and get them to the Ukrainians. So that's excellent. Now, German aid to Ukraine talks about the Swiss situation here, which is, it still remains the same, that there's this company that owns like almost 100 Leopard 1A5s and wants to get them to Ukraine, but because of the Swiss neutrality, they are unable to do so. They're not allowed to export to Ukraine. So Swiss SRF report, citing 2 independent sources, that the Swiss company Raug is making another attempt to sell the 96 Leopard 185M main battle tank stored in Italy to Rheinmetall. However, according to the report, this time both Rheinmetall and the German government guarantee that the main battle tanks will not be delivered to Ukraine. This means that they will remain irrelevant for Ukraine, and one of the last sources for new deliveries of Leopard 1 main battle tanks will disappear for good. The last option I see through which they can still benefit Ukraine would be if the rumors spread in 2023 about a deal between Germany and Greece were not completely made up. And this is now another attempt of closing the deal. A small Greek newspaper had reported in late August 2023 that Germany was buying up the Swiss Leopard 1A5s in Italy, supplying them to Greece, and that Greece was supplying its own Leopard 1A5s to Ukraine in return. At the same time, a Raug spokesman told me that the Swiss company was not involved in the deal the Greek newspaper reported about. Like I said, it was a rumor. If I recall correctly, no Greek or German officials even responded to this. So I'd be weird if they're trying to offload these Leopard 1A5s and they don't end up going to Ukraine in some way. But apparently there is a renewed move to sell those tanks in one way or another. But let's hope that they do find their way to Ukraine. Okay. Good to see that live chat is as lively as ever. Thank you so much for being here, guys. Right, Romania and the Netherlands will create a joint center for training Ukrainian F-16 technical personnel, according to the Dutch Ministry of Defense. So that you've got training taking place in in Arizona, sorry. And also there was training taking place in Denmark, but it's now moved, I think, to Romania. Romania and Netherlands are creating a joint training center, so there must be another training center, moving it away from an existing airbase, maybe, or something. I don't know. There's also been talk about the one in Czechia, whereby they're going to learn on the L-39s, the training aircraft, the training jets, and F-16s. But Czechia doesn't operate F-16s. And so not quite sure how that fits in, but anyway, good news that there will be more training for Ukrainian pilots. Because I don't know how long the Americans will continue to train F-16 pilots for, given the situation with the Trump administration, obviously. Now, a Ukrainian company, Nordex, has introduced a new Seawolf maritime drone in several modifications. So you can see that there are lots of different ones here. We've got air defense boat, a cover boat like machine gun, so suppressive fire and whatnot, a cover boat with a radar, an electronic warfare boat, a mine carrier, and a drone carrier. Here we have a 9.5 meter multifunctional powerhouse, 4 AIM-9 missiles, and that'll be in the air defense one, 12.7 millimeter M2 turret, machine gun, FPV drone or guided munition launcher, payload capacity of 4,000 kilograms, and a range of 1,500 kilometers, perfect for border protection, surveillance, and combined tactical missions. So this is a new one, I guess, kind of similar to your Magura V5s and whatnot, Sea Babies. There's so many different iterations of these kicking about now, but Nordex producing what looks like some pretty good stuff here. And of course, there's going to be the ability for Ukraine to export some of these things now that they've changed their regulations on being able to export during a war. Some people will be thinking, well, what are you doing exporting during a war? Because surely you need as many pieces of kit out on the front lines and in the water and whatever as you can possibly manufacture. But there is this issue whereby they've got capacity to build stuff. So the Ukrainians were saying last year, and I think this year it's even bigger, they had a $10 billion shortfall. It's like, we can build this much. We've got the money to build this much. If you just gave us another $10 billion, we could build everything we need. So they're always operating under their capacity. And that means that they could build more. But so in other words, a company from abroad could come in, or a nation from abroad could come in and say, okay, so you've got the potential, you've got the capacity to build more. Can we have another 100 of those drones that you could build for us? Then the Ukrainians are going to say, well, yeah, because we don't have the money to build them for ourselves. And that profit that we get off selling them to you can then be put back into redevelopment or buying stuff for ourselves if it's the state manufacturer. So exporting is actually a way of generating more income in order to build up their capacity internally. So I don't see there being a problem here, and which is why lots of people have said, lots of Ukrainians said, we need to change the rules because actually we need to be able to export. And that seems to be what's happening. Happy Mother's Day to lots of people around the world. It's not Mother's Day in the UK, but it is in other places. So happy Mother's Day, I guess, wherever you are. Okay, so that's there. Here we have, and these look to be different drones. So these aren't the Nordic Sea Wolves. Ukraine's military intelligence is testing marine drone carriers, a new type of sea drone that launches up to 4 FPVs from the water, built with NATO tech or up to NATO standard and AI capable. It can carry 500 to 3,000 kilograms of air, surface, or underwater weapons. And these pictures are from the Militiani article. We'll pop into these. That's not a great resolution image, but you get the idea there. And then also underwater torpedoes and stuff. So Militiani here. In fact, I need to refresh that and give us an English translation. Oh, there's an option up there. I didn't realize that. Let's go for English translation. There we go. So GUR showed unmanned drone carriers used to attack targets in Crimea. Again, like just the number of different manufacturers and drones out there, we're starting to see this great variety of USVs, as well as, we know how many aerial drones there are, right? LC platform carries from 500 to 3,000 kilograms of various types of weapons, air, surface, underwater. System uses the latest technologies combined with NATO-style artificial intelligence, says a Special Forces reconnaissance group involved in the uses of the drones of this type. Another unnamed drone carrier model was presented only in poor quality footage, where one can see a completely different hull shape and equipment with a launcher for 4 aircraft-type strike drones. It is highly likely that this particular naval drone was repeatedly used to deliver weapons to the Crimean coast in operations by the primary unit of the GUR of the Ministry of Defense in April. It was they also hit several Russian combat boats and a Tor M2 anti-aircraft and missile system in the waters of the occupied peninsula. And we've seen lots of drones hitting air defense systems and radars within that kind of 20 kilometers from the coastline situation along the Crimean coast, because these drones, these USVs, have been able to offload UAVs, aerial drones, to go and do those strikes. Both platforms feature Starlink satellite internet antennas, which allow the naval drones to extend their combat range to their maximum range. In addition to drones, Scouts first showed a control station for a marine platform with an operator's chair. Oh, I'm not showing this. Sorry. Here's the article I've been reading through. Anyway, Militiani gives you these pictures that you've just seen. Otherwise, and I'm just talking you through some more stuff here. It gives you an operator's chair as well as controls, a steering wheel similar to the aircraft steering wheel with a speed control lever. There are several buttons on the helm itself, one of which presumably is responsible for the bow roll of the unmanned vessel. Images from the platform's day and night cameras are displayed on the operator's augmented reality glasses, so VR headset, and duplicated on a monitor behind, presumably to inform other officers or at the control points. So I guess if we open in a new tab, we can't scroll through that, no, but we can make it a little bigger for you. So that's a kind of situation, and I'll show that to you. That's what's going on here. It looks to be pretty useful. So USVs are the order of the day at the moment. Using augmented reality glasses instead of conventional monitors allows the operator to combine images from several cameras into a single picture with a wide viewing angle. Wow. In addition, so I guess if you've got like one camera out front and then 2 to the side, then actually as you pan, the camera doesn't have to move. You're panning through the visuals that you can see. Maybe, I don't know. In addition, the image from the thermal imager located in the bow and the aft cameras is also displayed nearby. According to intelligence officials, the emergence of drone carriers has opened up opportunities not only for targeted destruction of ground targets, but also for air cover of large-scale naval operations. Of course, we saw 2 jets taken down recently. This is a weighty argument since the GUR Special Forces are actively conducting landings of sabotage groups behind enemy lines and raid operations in the Black Sea, it says. Okay, moving on. We have the Ukrainian-made GART 5100 remote mine clearance vehicle has been certified for serial production. All stages of production are carried out in Ukraine. This simplifies logistics and ensures fast delivery, maintenance, and repair. I mean, they are going to have, I mean, as someone says, I think under here, after this war, I honestly see Ukraine emerging as one of the strongest countries in the European Union. The pace of industrial and technological transformation there is huge. And with Europe heavily investing in defense, Ukrainian companies will have a major advantage. Their weapons have been tested and proven in real combat. This is a silver lining to the very dark cloud of the war in Ukraine, is that they have to come out of this war with as many competitive advantages as they possibly can in terms of IT, in terms of apps being used for, you know, military coordination, like we've seen with the Delta platform, in terms of weapons and all sorts. Yeah, absolutely incredible opportunity for them. But of course, you know, that is coming out of a landscape of horrific war and suffering. The warhead of the Ukrainian U-85-3 kamikaze drone. Why don't they just call them like Bob? Of the Bob or the Harry drone or the Judith, like, you know, just, yeah. But the U-85-3 kamikaze drone combines armor piercing and fragmentation capabilities. OSINT researcher Grandpa Roy, a good source actually, notes it uses a cumulative jet for armor penetration with metal pellets targeting enemy personnel, making it effective against both vehicles and infantry. And again, it's this kind of innovation, or I mean, it's not so much innovation like as in we've known how to make weapons like this previously, but it's, you know, attaching them to drones, making them cheap, but also, you know, proper nasty pieces of weaponry. And again, you know, talking about this kind of innovation cycle, Ukraine inspired it, Britain built it, NATO's deploying it. So meet the Kraken 3, an AI-powered warboat that launches kamikaze drones, navigates without GPS, and hunts in swarms. And here we have, I guess, designed or inspired in Ukraine, built by the British. I know the British, because we're an island nation, we are very much interested in all things maritime, and that's why we are in charge of the maritime with the, I think, Norwegians, the Maritime or the Naval Capability Coalition, and that's because that's in our best interest, right? And then we can build something to help Ukraine, and then NATO can then take advantage of that as us being part of NATO, etc., etc. Yeah, so things are looking interesting in the context of unmanned surface vehicles. And then staying on the UK topic here, the Royal Air Force has begun trials of first-person view drones, FPV drones, deployed from a Chinook helicopter. So wow, and we have seen evidence of the Russians trying this, but they didn't get on with it for some reason. And I don't know why it was. I don't know whether downdraft or whatever. They have tried out with some of their Me helicopters to operate drones to go and attack actually USVs. So over the Black Sea, release some FPV drones and go and blow up some of those USVs. But I have a feeling, if I remember correctly, it didn't end too well, or it's not been hugely successful. But here, the UK trying it with Chinook helicopters, so it could be, you know, some kind of difference there. But yeah, interesting. Of course, you would need a significant, I mean, it depends what you're using drones for, but you would need a significant amount of range on those drones, because you don't want to be flying a Chinook helicopter within 50 kilometers of the front line, right? So I guess it depends how you're going to use these things. Okay, moving on. Ukraine and Russia's decoy drones. Ukraine and Russia are locked in a new kind of arms race, says David Kirichenko. and not just firepower, but over deception. Economics of warfare turned on its head. Both sides are flooding the skies with decoy drones to exhaust and outmaneuver air defenses. Throughout 2024 to 2025, Ukraine escalated its deep strike drone campaign, hitting oil refineries, airfields, and infrastructure inside Russia. One March attack on Moscow was described as the largest drone assault of the war. Leading the charge is Ukraine's 14th Drone Regiment, now a specialized long-range strike unit. They began with civilian gear, but today they field advanced drones capable of striking over 1,000 miles into Russia. A single Ukrainian long-range strike drone costs $200,000. They can hit targets more than 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers inside Russia. Ukraine is aiming to produce around 30,000 in 2025. Now, 30,000 at 200K a pop is pretty bloody expensive. I have been wondering about these kind of Luti long-range drones, or whichever ones you're talking about. You know, the cost of these, what are they? And, you know, it's easy to say they need to be producing like throwing 100 of these into Russia every night, as the Russians do with their Shaheds. But the Shaheds aren't cheap. Yeah, they're cheaper, I guess, than they could be, but it was thought that they were much cheaper than they really were, and we found out how much the Russians were actually paying for the Shaheeds to both, I think, manufacture them themselves and get them from Iran. Oh, certainly it was when they were getting them from Iran, actually, I think, and they were way more expensive than we were thinking. And you're sending 100 of those in a night, you know, that adds up, doesn't it? So yeah, these things are expensive. But each operation includes dozens of low-cost decoy drones, and here's the key. So when Russia is sending in 150 drones, we are hearing quite often that there are a large amount of decoy drones. And so even my hope is that, because I've been reporting to you that there have been interception rates that have been getting worse and worse. And the Russians have been getting, you know, sometimes 30%. In fact, one night it was 50% of their drones through. And you're thinking that is absolutely freaking terrible, because that's, you know, that could be like 60 drones with all their explosive capacity, their payloads, smacking into whatever targets every night. But then you're wondering, well, actually, how many of those that get through are decoy drones? But then sometimes you get listed, those are brought, 60 drones were taken out by conventional means, and then like 47 were taken out by electronic warfare, or were decoy drones. So are they included in the ones that are kind of hand waved away? So is the general staff not counting decoy drones in the ones that get through? Is what I'm asking. Anyway, these are the kind of questions that go around my head every morning when I read the stats to you. But yeah, so a lot of those drones that are sent over into Ukraine are decoy drones. It says, but each operation includes dozens of low-cost decoy drones. Each Ukrainian decoy can cost just a few $1,000s. So we're not talking $200,000. We're talking a few thousand. Their job to make air defenses panic and then overwhelm them. This creates an open pathway. So you send a bunch of decoy drones in, air defense goes nuts, sends out all their expensive missiles, panics, expends their inventory of air defense capabilities, and then you send in the real drones. But of course, you know, people learn. But I guess although you learn from this, like, yeah, the first wave is going to be decoys. Are you sure they're definitely going to be decoys? And can, you know, each side does this, I'm sure. You can't afford to take the risk of saying, well, they're probably not real ones, they're probably decoys, because you end up getting a whole bunch of real ones actually sent. And you can play around with that idea, I'm sure. For the operation to be successful, says one Ukrainian commander leading long-range drone strikes, we need to launch decoys too to get across a contact line where the most intense air defense is. We use the decoys to make a corridor for ourselves. Ukraine is doing the same at sea, deploying swarms of decoy drones alongside waterborne vehicles like the Magura V5 to overwhelm Russian radar and clear the way for deadly strikes in the Black Sea. Russia uses the same playbook. I mean, this isn't exclusive to Ukraine. Of course it's not. Many Russian drones are equipped with Lüneburg lenses to mimic the radar signature of larger cruise missiles. Their goal, trigger premature Ukrainian missile launches and reveal air defense positions. Moscow and Kiev are racing to counter technology with technology as each side refines its hardware and software to combat the latest innovations by their opponents. The technology must constantly be upgraded and increases the cost of effects and affects the scale of production. Achieving surprise through deception, known as Maskirovka, was a key element of Soviet and later Russian military doctrine. Now modernized with drones, it's being used to devastating effect by both sides. Decoys forced the Ukrainian defenders to shoot them down, said Sam Bendit, ultimately allowing the Russians to identify air defense locations and units that can either be bypassed or hit by follow-on strikes. He said, distinguishing between real and fake drones in the heat of the attack is extremely difficult, and that's kind of my earlier point. Bender added, this pushes Ukraine to expend limited resources on every incoming drone, which is exactly what the Russians want. But AI could eventually help detect this better. So, of course, what you really want to be doing is taking out drones like Shahed drones with low tech. You want to be shooting them with, lead out of a pretty basic gun. But as they're flying higher and higher, that becomes more difficult. The Russians are adapting to that. And of course, even with a Leopard, which is effectively fairly low tech, they were kind of thought to be rendered obsolete, but now they've been brought back into play, haven't they? Each of those shells, the basic shells, I think are like $600 a pop, and you're absolutely hammering the air with a whole torrent of those shells. You are expending huge amounts of money on that low tech stuff. So, we're not going to send up a single expensive missile, but we're going to fire loads of fairly expensive rounds, actually. So that's where you want to go back to, maybe the ZU-23 or even lower end means. But of course, then your interception rates are going to be poorer. You want to shoot these things down. Russia has made extensive use of decoy drones in their mass attacks of Shahed 136 and Garan 2 UAVs on Ukraine. Mass producing the Gerbera UAV has just this purpose, said Grandpa Roy, an open source weapons researcher. Decoys aren't cheap, they're smart economic warfare. Our adversaries use $10,000 one-way drones, and we shoot them down with $2 million missiles. General Brian P. Fenton, commander of the U.S. Special Operations Command, said that cost-benefit curve is upside down. On April the 23rd, Ukraine struck a Russian drone factory in Yelabuga, producing 300 drones a day, and that's one I keep saying they've got the number one target of the Shahed drone factories. It was a key supply of Shaheds and Garans, many of them used in decoy missions. Air defense is undergoing perhaps the biggest transformation, said General Valery Zaluzhny. One of a large number of small and cheap drones has made the use of a large number of small and cheap drones, has made the use of extremely expensive missiles for air defense systems economically impractical. Ukraine now produces 80 to 90% of the drones used by the 14th Drone Regiment, and their capabilities surpassed any Western equivalents largely as a result of rapid feedback from the battlefield. Quote, at the start, it was the other way around, Casper said, but foreign models are like Toyotas now, while Ukrainian ones are like Mercedes. Ours are just leagues ahead. What a fascinating insight that is. As Russia's invasion grinds on, Ukraine's survival increasingly depends on speed, innovation, and deception. Kyiv must leverage asymmetrical warfare wherever possible, gaining a tactical edge and outsmarting the enemy at every opportunity. 100% correct there. So interesting thread that was. Moving on to German concerns now. So Rheinmetall's JV with Lockheed Martin joint venture. Rheinmetall's joint venture with Lockheed Martin to establish missile production in Germany, says Colby Babwa, will produce 10,000 SRMs and 10,000 missiles annually. SRM production begins next year, and missiles in 2027 will include Gimlers, ATACMS, Hellfires, and possibly others. This is exactly what you need. Localized production of missiles, and that makes them cheaper and quicker to get them. And if you can make them in Ukraine or with Ukraine as well involved, then wow, that'd be brilliant. But yeah, good stuff there. Now, the New York Times reported with reference to a US congressional source that the USA has authorized the transfer of 125 long-range artillery rockets, says German aid to Ukraine. Those are for Mars 2 and M142 HIMARS. So you've got your HIMARS and your Mars 2, which are equivalents to the HIMARS. So Germany and the UK, as well as the US, have provided these guided multiple launch rocket systems of differing types. 100 Patriot interceptors from Germany as well to Ukraine. So more missiles for the Patriot and missiles for the HIMARS or equivalent. Only recently at a meeting in Brussels, Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius announced that 30 Patriot missiles from the Bundeswehr stocks would be made available to Ukraine at short notice. Just two addendums. Firstly, the long-range artillery rockets should be GIMLRs with a range of up to 84 kilometers, as I wouldn't consider the German M26-82 rockets long-range, since they only have a range of up to 38 kilometers. Secondly, the delivery time frame, as we're talking about existing Bundeswehr stocks and only about ammunition, we do not need to wait for the industry to produce them or a training to be carried out. A delivery to Ukraine should therefore be made within a few weeks. Okay. Interesting stuff there from German aid. Now, Germany is building spy satellites to help Ukraine watch Russia without the US. Rheinmetall plans to begin production in late 2026, so this is some way off. But wow, aiming to give Ukraine battlefield eyes if Washington blinks. Wow. And actually, Europe needs to do that for their own national security independence. Now, the German government will again classify the supply of weapons to Ukraine, according to DPA. What this means is that Germany will not be announcing in public what they are giving to Ukraine, a bit like Finland and other nations. Keep it very quiet. Up to now, Germany's been known to be exceptionally transparent. Berlin has decided to again hide information about the supply in order to create, quote, strategic ambiguity in order to hide its actions from the enemy. I do understand that big time. In fact, Anton Gerashenko says upcoming German arms deliveries to Ukraine will now be classified. The decision was made not to give the enemy an advantage when they can literally see what the Ukrainian armed forces receive and when. Whether it's rocket launchers, tanks, or air defense systems, the previous government posted information on all types of weapons transferred to Ukraine online. Basically, that will no longer be the case. It's a very competent and appropriate decision. Some states have practiced the policy from the very beginning, from the full-scale war. Finland, for example, as I just said. This means that if, for example, a decision is made to transfer Taurus missiles, they will be delivered to Ukraine in complete secrecy. So some people are saying this is ahead of Taurus deliveries, that they are changing the rules here. German aid to Ukraine has a huge thread on this. And I think talking about Taurus as well. Let's just very quickly run through it. It looks like I need to clear up a few false assumptions that have developed in connection with the decision not to disclose Germany's military aid to Ukraine in the future anymore. That means the Taurus is coming, says point one. That means the Taurus is coming. Wrong. The decision has nothing to do with Taurus. I know numerous examples in which former government has financed equipment that was never made public, for example, at the request of end customer in Ukraine, or assistance was at least announced but never included in the official list of federal government. The new government under Merz could have handled a Taurus delivery in exactly the same way without any problems, simply not announce it and that's it. You don't have to reduce transparency to zero in order to hide a delivery. When a delivery has happened, we will know it anyways due to Ukrainian attacks on targets which haven't been attacked before or due to previously unknown efficiency in combating various targets like storage places, factories, and more. Two, that ends debates. The assumption is also wrong. I don't know what makes people think that, but of course it won't end any debates. In my opinion, it could rather ensure that there are more debates. On the one hand, I would like to point out once again that debates about the undisclosed military support from Germany were the reason why the military aid was made public in the first place. Merz and his CDU were also rightfully involved in early 2022. On the other hand, that would mean that the people, the media, and the political opponents would muzzle themselves. Just because Merz decides not to respond to it anymore, news media XYZ will decide to never write another article about German military aid, or opposition politicians Muller, Mayer, Schmidt won't talk about German aid anymore because of that. What kind of logic is that? The new decision will and should not end debates regardless of what the new government claims. Three, we inform the Russians too much. That could well be true. I agree. However, I would like to point out that even before the change of government and also before the election in February, the old government had already switched from providing information about military aid once a week to every 4 or 5 weeks. 4 or 5 weeks is more than enough time to bring equipment to Ukraine, distribute it to the units. The Russians are aware of what is being deployed on the battlefield. It is also very likely that Russia will notice when a train with 20, 30, or 50 armored vehicles arrives at the border, even without the German government's website. I agree that too much information has been provided. In my opinion, it would be sufficient to provide limited information once a month. In other words, once a month, provide information with rough quantities about aid that already has been delivered. Also, don't publicly announce new assistance anymore, which hasn't been delivered yet. That would be the golden path for me. For the most part, I just see disadvantages in the decision not to provide any more information at all. Just as the previous transparency in combination with the help actually provided has ensured that Germany's image has continued to improve over time and is now considered a very reliable and of the best partners Ukraine has. This will now ensure that Germany's image will be damaged over time. This also brings me to my next point. Transparency also helps to expose the foul play of other countries. I'm sure that the German transparency helped many people to realize how little France, for example, is actually doing for Ukraine in comparison, despite all the PR campaigns that Macron regularly launches. Another point, will Merz keep his word? No idea. For years, Merz and the CDU have criticized the previous government for not providing enough military aid, and rightly so in some cases. Now that he is in power and no longer provides information about military aid, it will no longer be really be possible to verify whether he's actually doing more than Scholz, or whether it was and is all PR fog and propaganda for the election campaign. In principle, it is the case in France. He could keep making magnificent statements, but in reality, reduce military aid and nobody would notice unless the Ukrainian government talks about it, which they won't, or it gets leaked to the media. I see this as a massive problem, especially given the recent statement of the new foreign minister who said on TV that the new German government will not do more in terms of military aid than the former German government. One last point, fake news and propaganda. When the new government doesn't disclose its military aid in rough numbers anymore, we can't combat pro-Russian propaganda also in Germany anymore. How on earth should we now prove that Germany is actually doing something for Ukraine, or that we have provided Ukraine with close to 48 billion euros in assistance and not the 200 billion some East German Putin fan claims when he talks about how damaged our economy and country is, but we are spending hundreds of billions on an already lost war. You get what I mean. So a really long thread, but useful to understand the pros and cons, but as German aid would say, more likely the cons of not anymore producing transparent and public proclamations as to what Germany has delivered to Ukraine. And I pretty much agree with German aid to Ukraine there. I think there is a benefit in doing it, certainly once every 5 weeks. Once, if you are providing something sensitive, then it gives it time to be embedded, or you just don't admit the really sensitive things. You can still publicly disclose what you are giving without saying you're giving tourists, for example, as he mentioned. Right, moving on. In fact, no, I'm not going to move on. I'm going to have some beer because I can, and my vocal cords need it. Thank you for the live stream there. I actually, now's probably a good time. No, we're gonna do the final German little piece here. So here we have Ukraine currently has other priorities in its dialogue with Germany. Zelensky on whether the supply of Taurus is being discussed by the new German government. Quote, the issue of the air defense is relevant for us. Germany has helped us a lot with Patriots and helping us a lot with IRIS-T. In other words, well, at least according to Zelensky in public, it's more important that air defense is discussed with Germany than Taurus, for example. Right. A few thank yous as we are getting towards the end of the section of aid to Ukraine and moving on to a few other bits and pieces and Russian equipment too. Johnny Christensen, thank you, my good Danish friend there, with a super sticker, and Johnny Nevergaard, likewise from Norway. Awesome Scandinavian love there. Thank you, my good Nordic neighbours. I like a bit of not assonance. This is my multiple sclerosis mind not being able to come up with a word, so I won't come up with that word. Thank you, Axel Pro, for being a member. Super ATP, thank you. Tremors with some Australian love. Putin was never going to accept the ceasefire. Yep, I agree. European nations and the US have hamstrung themselves by their own red lines. Well, no, I disagree with that. But it requires that they actually come forward with the sanctions that they were talking about. I mean, the reality of the situation for me is, Tremors, is that we need to sanction Russia to the hilt. And here's a perfect excuse to do that, because that will bring Russia to their knees, which is what is needed to really bring an end to this war. They need to lose militarily. In order to lose militarily, I think they need to lose economically first. And this is how you expedite that. So I think Ukraine and Europe needed to generate a way that would put Russia in a corner, and they would definitely, I think they were thinking that the Russians would not be in agreement to have a ceasefire. And that's exactly what happened. But the problem is, and they had the US on board with this, the problem is Putin very cleverly said, yeah, no ceasefire, but personal impersonations in Istanbul, which is what the ceasefires were leading towards. And he's jumped to that bit which everyone thinks, yeah, we want that. But it allows him to string out the war by having peace negotiations for possibly months and months and months, or continuing to do the war without a ceasefire. And that has potentially appealed to Trump, whereas everyone else is going, no, that's just a ruse to continue the war. But I assume that the Europeans would know full well that Russia wouldn't agree to a ceasefire. So they must be prepared to come up with the goods in terms of in terms of sanctions. Otherwise, it's a truly hollow promise or hollow threat. And they would be surely aware that Russia would be unlikely to agree to a ceasefire. So I don't know. It just depends on what we're just going to have to wait and see tomorrow. But Tremor says US and Europe have hamstrung themselves by their own red lines. Threats of sanctions and military aid probably doesn't worry Putin. No, it does. Sanctions do worry Putin. And when Peskov comes out and says, oh, we're not really worried about sanctions, we've had them before. Yeah, you are on for a deficit this year of more than your sovereign wealth fund reserves. You are economically in a lot of trouble. So I actually think that is definitely an issue. We'll do a Goose Springsteen comment before going on to the rest of the military aid news. Goose says, something for the beer fund, JP. Thanks, dude. I appreciate it. Nothing useful to say, but can we hope for more UK politics-related videos over the coming years? I'd love to have a chance to go full coal-powered gammon on a live. Goose Springsteen and myself disagree somewhat politically speaking. And what's going to happen as the Ukraine war comes to an end, and hopefully it does come to an end to the benefit of Ukraine, comparatively speaking, I am going to have to do videos not on the Ukraine war, because the Ukraine war will have thankfully come to an end. I quit my job anyway as a teacher to become to doing stuff based at home because of my multiple sclerosis, right? And then as I was doing like home-based work, actually for the Office for National Statistics at the time, I started doing videos on YouTube, and then it was taking up more and more of my time as the obsession became more and more complete. And actually I got enough viewers to say, well, actually I need to quit my job and do YouTube full time. So now I do YouTube full time. This is what I do. And actually it fits me. Like, there is no more perfect job for this, that for my multiple sclerosis. Honestly, this is the sweet spot, because I cannot move very well. And being able to sit here and speak to the computer and research at the computer, although I'm not using my legs enough and I do need to do more exercise, this actually fits with my physical ailments really, really well. And so I will just do geopolitical videos. And I think, I'd like to get back to doing some philosophical videos as well, but my brain has had all my philosophical knowledge replaced by geopolitical knowledge now. So that would be a struggle. I am editing a book at the moment, which will probably be my last book on that kind of stuff. I actually wrote my half of the book back in 2020. So I think my writing abilities, or like my cognitive abilities, have decreased somewhat in the last few years. So I don't know whether I'd have the wherewithal to be able to write another book properly. Anyway, I will be certainly doing videos on UK politics, as well as anything that I find interesting. And of course I'll have my own baggage that I'll bring to those videos. But if I'm challenged in appropriate ways, then that's brilliant, because the idea is that my opinions are only as good as the justifications for them. And if you guys can smack down my justifications, then I'll change my mind. That's why I used to blog and then write articles and really interact in the same way I really interact with you guys in the comments every single day. I used to do that when I wrote articles, and 5,000 articles was a lot of pieces to write. They weren't all like huge. Some of them were very small, and videos and this and that, embedded videos and stuff, and just short comments. But a lot of them were massive articles as well. And I used to interact with the comments a lot because, from a philosophical point of view, if you're like, the best way to, I can't sleep at night. Okay, I can't sleep at night if believing something that I know is on shaky foundations. I just can't do it, right? I can't believe something that I'm pretty sure is a load of bollocks because I want to believe it. You guys should have seen that by the way I communicate with you. Like, I really believe the things that I tell you, and I won't lie to you because I won't lie to myself. But in order not to lie to myself, and in order to be totally confident that I'm telling you the right thing, I need to be confident that I believe the right thing. In order to be confident that I believe the right thing, I need to test it. And the best way to test it, my articles used to be like, here's my thinking on this topic. You guys go for it, and I'm going to read your comments and see that if I'm justified in still believing this, and give me your best arguments against this position. And my videos, in a sense, are that, which is, here are my beliefs. What I don't want is you guys telling me to not talk about certain things because you don't like to, it makes you feel uncomfortable or whatever. That won't fly with me. And I did that thing on Brexit the other day, and I still had people in the comments to my Brexit videos saying, I won't be shut up by you guys because you don't want to hear about it. And people still saying, stop talking about this. I'm like, that's the point of the video. Ugh. Anyway, it is about testing my ideas, and you guys are the way that I test my ideas. Just now in video form rather than article form. And so I will be continuing to express my opinions on all sorts of things, and you guys won't agree with all of it, and I'll probably lose viewers if I'm too much in one camp than another. But I also don't want to lie to myself, and I could report things truly objectively. But the problem is, when you start losing your own baggage on reporting stuff, it becomes vacuous from any kind of opinion. And that's what the BBC News is like to me. Like, I'm a really big stalwart fan of the BBC, right? I think it's really important to have a public service broadcaster. I really, really genuinely do. But part of the issue with the BBC News is that, and people think BBC is liberal, but they think it's liberal because they look at things like the programming and say, oh, they're black people and gay people, and it's all woke and liberal, and therefore the BBC is liberal, and it's got a left-wing bias. So it's socially liberal because it's trying to reflect society as part of its charter. But when you look at the news broadcasting, it's actually quite vacuous and doesn't really give you much either left or right. It just tries to report things and stay away from making political judgments itself. And I could do that as a video, but then it's just like, well, this person said this and that person said that. I'm not going to report to you whether I think that's good or wrong or justified or not. It's just, that's what they said and that's what they said. And that's kind of where the BBC is at these days, even though people accuse it of being left or too right. Actually, I would accuse it of being too vacuous, but it necessarily has to be that as part of its charter because it needs to be balanced. And unfortunately, the best way to be balanced is not to have political opinions. So you'll find that the BBC News just doesn't have political opinions. You might think it does, but it doesn't. But then you might look at like the programming and think otherwise. Okay, back to other stuff. Anyway, thanks, Goose. You totally sidebarred me there. Right, Howard Buffett, Warren Buffett's son. So Warren Buffett, if you don't know, is a billionaire who is now a massive philanthropist. Actually, he's pretty much too old to be the philanthropist he once was. So his son has taken over, Howard Buffett, and he's a massive fan of Ukraine, of supporting Ukraine. And actually, a couple of these, again, sorry to be overtly pro-liberal here, but when you look at the sorts of people who have supported Ukraine, they end up actually most often being like liberal philanthropists. So Howard Buffett and George Soros have pumped an absolute ton of money into Ukraine individually or through their foundations. I think it is the Australian Andy Forrest. He's a bit different. I think he's quite divisive a figure, but he supported Ukraine quite a lot. But anyway, like Howard Buffett and George Soros have piled an absolute ton of money into Ukraine. In fact, Howard Buffett has donated over $1.45 billion. That's a single human being, right? Of his own money into supporting Ukraine during the time of war. He's the biggest donor in support of Ukraine as an individual. As Bricktop Nafo here says, absolute hero. And yeah, like absolute freaking hero to do that. Big fan of that. Yeah, don't get me started on PBS and NPR, where the US has just started, or Trump has just started an assault on them. But yeah, Warren Buffett has just announced his retirement from his massive hedge fund. Yeah, he is. He's. You can argue about where these guys got their money from and betting on, like, currencies and stuff. And yeah. But where they're putting their money now, I think, is Andrew Forrest. Yeah, Andy, he's my mate, obviously. Yes, where they put the money now is super important, and it's interesting listening to Bill Gates, who has just said he's going to try and give even more of his money away. Like, he on record saying he was struggling to give his money away. He was just making more money than he could give away. Something I would like to do. I was talking about this. Helen's daughter, she was saying this the other day. Like, if you were a billionaire, you would just go into Just Giving and just like finish everyone's campaigns. There's a thing that I've donated to before called, yeah, it is donated. I mean, you're technically supposed to get your money back. You don't always get it back, but generally you do. And there's a service called Kiva, which is a micro lending website. And through Kiva, what you do is, instead of giving money to charity and that, or giving people money charitably, this is a way of lending money to. It's kind of like, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. With micro lending, you have people applying for like $2,000 because I need to buy a new water system for my homestead in the middle of, I don't know, Syria or somewhere. You get people from all around the world. Usually, these are generally your poorer areas of the world, and they're trying to like start a business or do this. And so they apply to these loans, and then you contribute to the loans, and then the payment back of the loans are really, really preferable. They're like negligible. No one's making money really off the back of these people borrowing money, and you hope that they are getting to a place where they can pay back that money, and so you get the return, and then you reinvest that somewhere else, and you get it back, and then you keep doing that. If I was Bill Gates or someone like that, I'd just be like going to every single micro lending project and going, yeah, all $2,000 or $4,000 or $1,000 or $10,000, because it'd be like a drop in the ocean, and you could just like complete every single one. Right. And then you just like, I feel really good. Yeah, you can talk about, yeah, I'm doing it only to make myself feel better. Is there is there such a thing as altruism? Blah, blah, blah. We can have that philosophical discussion, or psychological discussion even. But like, I just love to be able to do that. I'd love to be a billionaire and use my money for the betterment of the world. Yeah, that floats my boat. Anyway, enough talking about that. That's Howard Buffett. So that's pretty cool. Now, I'm going to play you this. This is nothing that you haven't heard already, but it's just a nice exposition of how money to Ukraine is often spent inside the countries giving that money.
We've spent about $48 billion in weapons and security measures for Ukraine. That's over 2 years. This year, the U.S. Department of Defense will spend $800 billion. $800 billion. And aid to Ukraine is an amount equal to about 3% of that. And for that money, Ukraine has taken back 87% of its land. Ukraine is now in control of 87% of its land. And the UK Ministry of Defense estimates that Putin's warfighting capability has been degraded by half. The U.S. Department of Defense has been spending, on a scale of $800 billion a year for decades, in part to deter Russia. And they haven't deterred Russia because Russia's gone into Georgia. There's Chechnya back in the day. There was, Ukraine twice.
Syria, yeah.
Yeah, Syria, yeah. And so this is the most effective money we have spent to deter Russia. And so on the face of it, it's money well spent. It's a war. If some of the money is misspent, these things happen. But the result of 3% of the budget of the U.S. Department of Defense has been degrading Putin's fighting capabilities by half.
Yeah, really, really well said. And actually, now the US is looking to spend $1 trillion on defense, and they're actually giving virtually nothing. Well, they are giving nothing to Ukraine. So the US don't seem to understand how brilliant their investment has hitherto been, which is really frustrating. And then the last piece in this section, Azov stands for innovation, adaptive thinking, and the continuous pursuit of new solutions to complex challenges. The establishment of a dedicated battalion for foreign volunteers was a natural and logical step in Azov's evolution, writes Lieutenant Colonel Yuri Czech in his op-ed. So just to let you know what has happened here, in case you don't know, but Azov, that started off the war, quite controversial. It had already shaken off the kind of previous far right associations before the war started, but still the Russians particularly were peddling that association. And actually now Azov is just a regular, in fact, one of the best operating units. So it's becoming part of one of these core. And they are now starting, because the International Legion that was originally started up full of international soldiers and whatnot was actually a bit of a shit show in many ways. With all due respect, I don't think it's particularly well organized, and James from Wine Ukraine has talked about that. And actually, Azov are going to start. They're going to start their own foreign legion type thing, and they are also a very well organized, very effective unit. And now that they have shaken off that, hopefully, have shaken off that association with the far right, they are better able to attract people into fighting with them and for Ukraine, and that's really good news. I've long said actually that Ukraine really needs to pick up its international recruitment in a way that Russia has done, in the same way they copied Russia in terms of convict recruitment, but do it better. And the only problem is when you start recruiting, as I've said before to you a number of times, when you start recruiting foreign fighters, they become more valuable as POWs than Ukrainians. Not that there's a greater intrinsic value to these humans, but there's a greater extrinsic value, which means that you can use these humans for a greater end as POWs. If they're foreign, you have more leverage with them as Russians than you would have with Ukrainians. That is a challenge. That's definitely the case. But yeah, Colombians have been a lot of Colombians over there, very effective. They've had a lot of background in sort of FARC and whatnot over in Colombia. Either in their own armed forces or against the armed forces, with these kind of left-wing rebellious groups. But yeah, we can move Colombian volunteers to the front for $2,000 a head. Let's fundraiser squad. Yeah, there's something. Someone was it you, Thomas, was hitting me with this idea sometime back, and I've just remembered that was a thing. But yeah, moving people from Colombia, like, you know. I suppose there's a question to be had here, discussion to be had about whether mercenaries are a bad thing. Right? Is there anything wrong with having mercenaries fighting for either side? But anyway, yeah, there's a piece there in an op-ed in the Kyiv Independent about Azov Brigade creating their own international battalion. Right, now moving on to Russian things here. We're going to start with Russia aims to produce 633 Kh-101 cruise missiles in 2025, an investigation finds, according to Maritime Press. Russia has increased the Kh-101 missile production from 56 annually to in 2021 to 50 missiles monthly in 2025, according to an investigation. That is truly scary, although, you know, as someone says, really, Russia, prove it. But I without having read that article yet, and, you know, looking into what the provenance of that claim is, yeah, I think Russia are going to be ramping up as much as they possibly can. The question is, what can they possibly scale up to? Russia is carrying out a massive expansion of a plant in Siberia to increase production of powerful explosives used in artillery shells and other munitions of war, according to Reuters. And indeed, there's some evidence of this from satellite imagery. Where do we have it? I'm sure there is something else. Here we go. So Colby Badwa has that. Actually, let's pull that to there. Here we go. So Reuters investigation have found a new facility being constructed at Russia's Bisk Oleum plant will be able to produce 6,000 tons of RDX or HMX explosive filler per year. That is scary stuff. Hopefully it's on the radars of the Ukrainians there in terms of targeting. Russia produces 1,400 Iskander missiles and 500 KH-101 missiles annually, The Economist reports. Only 10 to 15% of the 1,500 to 2,000 tanks and 3,000 armored vehicles are new. Most are refurbished Soviet-era gear. These reserves could run dry by 2026. But the worrying part there, of course, is the claim about the missiles and whatnot. Iskanders and cruise missiles being produced at worrying numbers for the Ukrainians. Russian advanced drones equipped with artificial intelligence and resistant to electronic warfare defenses have been spotted in Ukraine. First observed in Sumy in February of this year, these drones are now appearing more frequently on the eastern Ukrainian front line. And here's the article in Euromaidan Press. So, oops. I don't know why it does that. It goes a bit mental. Let's find out the original article. Here we go. So, so many adverts. Serhiy Bezkresnov, communication expert and head of the Radio Technology Center, has revealed the growing use of these drones, first spotted in Sumy in February, and now increasingly in eastern Ukraine. Quote, drones have become the defining weapon of the Russia-Ukraine war, with both sides deploying millions of drones for surveillance, strikes, and sabotage. These drones now account for more than 2/3 of the casualties along the front, killing or injuring hundreds of thousands of troops and destroying thousands of vehicles. According to him, the drones are equipped with 34 amp hour battery, enabling them to carry a 3-kilogram payload over a distance of up to 80 kilometers. They are made entirely from imported components, and while they may seem unremarkable at first glance, they are entirely innovative production inside. The drone is controlled via LTE mobile networks and feature both inertial and satellite navigation systems. It's equipped with a powerful 14 megapixel camera, a Jetson video recognition and processing module, and a laser rangefinder for height map orientation. Additionally, it carries a high-speed hard drive with over 100 gigabytes of storage data and significant computational power. He notes that the groups of 2 to 6 drones, such drones, have already been detected several times, suggesting the presence of an integrated swarm solution on board. Quote, this type of strike drone is considered by many experts to be the future because the drone is controlled by artificial intelligence. It does not rely on satellite navigation signals, meaning its control cannot be jammed by electronic warfare systems. Such a drone can even detect the operation of air defense systems and anti-aircraft drones and perform evasive maneuvers, adds the expert. He emphasizes that while this type of drone is not yet widely used, as for example the Lancet, it is appearing more frequently, and the Russian military is likely testing its use in combat conditions. Slightly worrying there. Here we have, and I showed you this video the other day, but in the hits and losses, but it just shows that the Russians are really concentrating on taking Ukrainian ISR drones out, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. So Russians are borrowing Ukrainian counter-drone tactics by targeting a range of Ukrainian ISR drones with their own FPVs. So the Russians are, I mean, there's 70 drones that are taken out in this video alone, and they name each of these drones. What's interesting, though, the good news about seeing all of these Ukrainian drones taken out is, one, they are using all of these Ukrainian drones, a lot of them. Two, the range of drones on this. There's quite a spectrum of different Ukrainian drones here. That's a German HF1 there. That's being replaced by the HQ2. But yeah, loads of different drones. So the Ukrainians are using a lot of different drones, but the Russians are trying and succeeding to some extent in taking out these reconnaissance drones using their own interceptors. And we hear that Iran is preparing to send launchers for the Fateh 360 short-range ballistic missiles, giving Moscow a strike option against Ukrainian frontline targets. This is a big problem. If they start getting to use a whole bunch of, short-range ballistic missiles, then Ukraine is in trouble. Russians haven't had that to be able to use, and yeah, it's worrying if Iran are able to do that unanswered. The final thing I have to share with you is this. I forget what this was about. Let's have a look. Here's an interesting fact. Pakistan's US-supplied F-16 fighter jets are subject to strict end-user agreements and foreign military sales conditions, which limit their use to counter-terrorism and defensive operations. Okay, so just a little bit of information about what's been happening. So the Pakistan-India conflict, you had this supposedly the biggest dogfight in history, modern aerial warfare ever, with like maybe, I forget the numbers, was it 160 planes? But of course, they can't see each other. It's beyond visual range. So dogfights these days are not like that. It's like a plane that's 200 kilometers away saying, yeah, I've got something on radar. I'm going to press a button, fire a missile, and see you later. That's your kind of dogfight. So both of these sets of planes were inside their own countries, just flying around doing stuff. And in the end, a number of, and I say a number because the Pakistanis claim 5 Indian jets were shot down. Now, they claimed 3 of them were Rafale, French Rafales. One was a MiG-29 was it? And one was a Su-27, if I remember correctly, something like that. Anyway. We know, I think, that definitely 2 jets were shot down, and there's been some admission. They were shot down, according to the Pakistanis, by Pakistani-Chinese co-production jets, the J-10, is it the J-10FC, firing Chinese rockets or Chinese missiles. And those air-to-air missiles were supposedly should have been the ones with the export variant with the shorter range. But I was watching a video the other day saying actually China's provided them, which should be illegal, with longer range missiles, 300-kilometer range air-to-air missiles, which is significant. That's a really good range. If you had them in Ukraine, Ukrainians would be freaking laughing. 300-kilometer range on an air-to-air missile, excellent. And apparently the Pakistanis were using the Saab radar plane, the same radar plane that Ukraine have received 2 of from Sweden. They were using that to then extend the range of finding these targets. So the combination of using the radar planes, which increases those jets' own radar ranges, plus an extended range missile meant that they shot a bunch of Indian planes down. Now, people are saying, oh, this shows how crap the Rafales actually are. And other people are saying, no, it doesn't show that at all. You don't know the context. You don't know the details. You don't know what went on here and exactly what was happening. And it would be really problematic to make that claim. Rafales are, decent fighter jets. But it is also to say that the Pakistanis, but B, the Chinese have good equipment as well. So just be really careful. But anyway, here, Pakistan also has a load of F-16. So why were they flying their other jets that you might assume would be less capable jets in the F-16? Well, these agreements, these kind of ITAR agreements, explicitly prohibit offensive missions against India, including airstrikes and cross-border attacks, without prior US approval. So it kind of makes you wonder why Pakistan has F-16s if they're never going to be able to use them. The US requires Pakistan to seek authorization before deploying F-16s outside its territory or engaging in joint operations with third countries, effectively preventing their use in conventional warfare against India. So lots of, I think, interesting weapons stuff to derive, information to derive from the India-Pakistan conflict. So there you go. Right, I'm going to get back to answering any comments here. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know if there are yeah, I'm not sure what I can answer. Anyway, I will just do a few more super chats before we go on, or actually to bring this to a conclusion, because I have to shoot out with my missus in a second. So Tremors says, again, thank you, Tremors, maybe we take a page out of sci-fi books and invest a force field to stop drones. Well, isn't it funny how sci-fi often becomes science fact, and where you're looking at autonomous drones and stuff and you're thinking, oh my goodness, is this Skynex? Is this the Terminator come true again? Yeah, science fiction so often becomes science fact. I'm sure people look into these sort of things with the full recognition that they are pulling on their own knowledge of sci-fi. Okay, says Tremors again. As much as I love the soothing tones of JP's voice, I'm going to have to drop the last of my allowance and go back to bed. Almost 3 a.m. here. Adios. Oh, Tremors, you didn't hear me say all this about your wonderful comments. Tremors, you're the most incredible human being on earth. Oh, you missed it. You didn't hear it. Oh, bad luck. Thanks, Tremors. Really appreciate your support. Michael Duchat, a legend, for supporting. Please check out. You should send me the link to your Canadian retro apparel shop that you've sent me stuff from, and I often wear Canadian things. So thank you, Michael Duchat, and I'll I'll throw it around. Thank you, Michael. Rudy Hermans, thank you very much for your support. This may be something completely different. We've already raised a lot of money for Ukraine with our team, and this is true. And I'm so proud of you guys for completing the Car for Ukraine campaign. Absolutely incredible. This is really incredible. But isn't it time that we, with our community, help Jonathan himself to raise money for MS research? That's interesting. I mean, that's a big old bucket. And that's a very kind thing very interesting thing to say. I'd much rather support for Ukraine right at the moment. I just think, yeah, one thing that does frustrate me is that there should be a real embracing of stem cell therapy. I'm a massive advocate. So really, thank you for this, and nice that you brought this up. I had stem cell therapy in Russia in 2019, as many of you will know. I've said this, and members, you can see my video where I talk about this. It's the only video I've got for members, so I need to do more for you guys. But I got stem cell therapy in Russia in 2019, and that's because I was diagnosed with progressive multiple sclerosis, primary progressive, which meant that as soon as I was diagnosed with it, I had this my initial MS was one that just gets worse. Whereas most people, 85% of people, have what's called relapsing remitting MS, where you get worse, better, up and down, up and down. I am really consistent, unless I get ill, which will topically affect me and stuff like that, and the heat of the summer will affect me. But generally, I just get worse until I die, until I can't move and die. And at the time in 2019, when I was diagnosed with it, the NHS had no treatments for PPMS, for primary progressive multiple sclerosis. They literally said, just live well, and maybe it'll be 25 years before you know a wheelchair, or it could be 6 months. And I'm like, brilliant. Okay. So I went and did, what I'm like. I went and did my researched the shit out of it, and then found out that HSCT, stem cell treatment was the best way forward, and one of the best places in the world for it. There are two at the forefront. One's in Mexico and one's in Moscow, and they're literally the best places for it. Moscow have been doing this treatment for MS since 1999, and so they were really on it. And I did all my research. There's loads of Facebook groups about the provision and groups that the people have had it, and I went for, and I'm so thankful I did. I went for the Russian one and had to raise £40,000 to do that. That's basically how much it cost me, because I was obviously not getting on the NHS. Right now, the NHS is doing it, and they're doing it in Southampton, just down the road from me. But I probably wouldn't have qualified with PPMS. They'd take the relapsing remitting people, but it takes the NHS a long time to make sure the data's there before they invest in doing that. And also, they're having to fight Big Pharma. And this sounds a bit conspiracy theory, but Big Pharma relies on a business model of not curing people more generally. They'd much rather have someone on a drug over a chronic period of time, over a long period of time, and then their treatment is selling the drug to them over and over. If you cure someone, then they're like, we can't make money out of that. It's obviously the business model. So if you have stem cell therapy, like I had stem cell therapy, and I don't need any drugs for MS, do you know how much the average person costs in drugs who has MS? And there's freaking so many people with MS. MS is really common, but it's like something, is it 30 to 40,000 pounds a year? So you multiply that by what, 200,000 people in the UK alone with MS or something like that, then you've got billions of pounds being spent on pharmaceuticals every year. And if you have HSCT and stem cell therapy, then you plateau and you don't need drugs. And you're like, so Big Pharma is dead against HSCT. So when you look at MS charities like the MS Society and MS Team and blah, 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 big charities in the UK, they put stem cell therapy right down, and you can find something about it in a corner of the website somewhere. But because they receive a lot of their funding from pharma company, big pharmaceuticals, I'm pretty sure those big pharmaceuticals are saying, please do not say how big and how good HSCT is, or how good stem cell therapy is, because that is against our whole business model. And it's really interesting. I've seen on BBC News actually several times when people have had stem cell therapy for MS and they've gone on the news and said, this has done an amazing job, my MS is now stabilized, which has happened to me. That's what happened to me. I've broadly been stable for 5 years now, 6 years now, because I had stem cell therapy. So you go on BBC News. I remember seeing someone sitting on the sofa, and they're saying how wonderful the stem cell therapy is. And they said, and now here's someone from the MS Society, and I'm a big fan of the MS Society, do wonderful stuff. But the MS Society person sat there and went, "Oh, we don't advocate you do this," and blah blah blah. And they were really negative about stem cell therapy. And they're like, whoa, where's this coming from? And then when you understand that something like 50% of funding comes from big pharma, you're like, and I don't want to be all conspiracy theory, like, but you know, if my business model worked like that, then you know, you can understand why they'd be putting pressure on the single biggest source of information for treatment for multiple sclerosis comes from these charities. I got diagnosed with it. My first place I went was MS Society, join up. Right, what do? Now, if they'd said do stem cell therapy, I would have been like, right, I'm going to go and do stem cell therapy. But they didn't, because actually they didn't get the fund. You know, anyway. Point being that I had that, and I would advocate every time the coconut, I would advocate getting stem cell therapy. I'm a massive advocate for it, and it has transformed so many people's lives that I know personally, because I had my treatment with these people from all around the world, Australians, Americans. I'm still in contact with loads of them on these different groups, and it was an absolutely incredible experience. Now my legs are getting worse. My walking is much worse than it's ever been, but part of that is because I sit here and talk to you all day long and don't do enough exercise. So that pool getting put up in my back garden, I tether my self to the tree. We've got a little pear tree that's randomly in our garden. I tether myself to that tree and I swim and I don't move, and it's great. And summer, although it's worse for my MS in terms of the heat, actually I'm going to do more exercise. So I really do need to move more, because this job is perfect for my MS, but also it makes me sit down and not do any kind of movement on a daily basis. Anyway, that's a load of personal information there about my MS and my life and stem cell therapy. But I do have that Russian hospital to thank for my stem cell therapy. They were amazing. And he was so good, the main doctor there. Yeah, I'm so glad it's starting to pick up in the UK now, and we're getting it here too. So that's really good. Yeah, my stability is not as good as it was. Yeah, and it's funny you say this, Thomas, but you might have noticed me struggling verbally more than usual. I do also wonder, every summer I start thinking my MS is just getting worse and it's terrible. And actually it's the latent heat of summer coming on. And we've had a really, really warm last 6 weeks. And as summer comes on, I struggle more. And then when it goes to being colder again, it inflames my body completely and will affect my MS hugely. So, yeah, although someone says I didn't notice you struggling verbally at all, but I felt that I have struggled more recently. But there you go. Anyway, thank you for all of your support today. I do have a treadmill. So my Helen's parents got us a treadmill, actually, for my twin boys. They were like trying to get them using it, but I use that, but I just don't use it enough. I wanted it in the lounge, but my partner wouldn't let me have it in the lounge because it's right in the way of everything. But if it's in the lounge, every time I walk past it, but right, I'm going to get on it. It's stuck in the garage, and yeah, and I just don't use it enough. But there you go. Anyway, you don't need to know any of this. What else? Okay, Thomas says, I've been through some of you twice already. This is different, and that's interesting. It could be that my MS is taking a little bit of a toll on me. It could well be. I'm generally not getting enough sleep at the moment these days, but there you go. But thanks for your concern. Okay, thank you very much for being here. I need to go and spend some time with my family again. I really appreciate your support. Thank you to all the people in the super chats today: Johnny Christensen, Johnny Nevergard, Tremors multiple times, Goose Springsteen, Michael Vuchar, and Rudy Hermans. Really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. And all the normal places you can help: buy me a coffee, PayPal, all linked below. But you know, I try not to shout about that. There is more for Chris Jones from Clockwork Design, who's done a bunch of awesome designs. Benny Pie has been uploading them onto Redbubble, and so we've got loads of merch. I don't usually talk about this, but it's more for those designs, which is so cool. And we've uploaded the NAFO patches to cups and stuff, so you can get mugs with our NAFO patches on, which I think is really, really cool. Helps if I didn't just drop them as soon as I try to pick them up. So they are cool designs. Thank you to Chris Jones and JR, and they are now available on mugs and stuff like that. So it is linked below. There are 2 merch links. One of them goes to Reporting from Ukraine, who I get a bit of cut whenever he sells some stuff. If you go through that link, that kind of thing, usual kind of YouTubey stuff. But there's another link with my own merch, and go and check it out and see what you like. It's probably not crazy cheap. They never are. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. Speak to you soon. Big love, and we'll keep an eye out on stuff that's going on regarding. Well, really, we're waiting to hear from the US, aren't we, with regard to the kind of peace negotiations, the ceasefire. And tomorrow is, of course, the day. So, you know, if Europe and Zelensky and the US don't do anything about Russia not agreeing to a ceasefire, then all those threats are impotent, and that's a bit of an issue. So tomorrow is a really, really big day. But you can rest assured that I'll try and keep you abreast of everything that's going on. In the meantime, guys, take care. I'm going to finish my beer, and then have a nice evening with the missus. Take care. Speak soon.